G'day everyone, I'm Smokescreen and welcome back to another video, and welcome back to some brand new content for Gran Turismo 7. We had an update a couple of days ago and it brought in, among other things, which we'll touch on, but I guess the big thing for today is going to be this track, which has been somewhat controversial among the community. We're at Grand Valley Highway 1. Which is essentially the Gran Turismo 7 adaptation of Grand Valley Speedway, which people knew and loved in the old Gran Turismo games. We're going to be pretty much spending the majority of this video talking about the track itself, but we're going to be doing that in the context of the GT World Series, Season 3 of the 2022 to 2023 exhibition, which we're here today. In round number 1, it was to be decided, TBD, right up until this update dropped, and then it updated to show that it was in fact Group 3 at Grand Valley Highway 1. Of course, the new track that was introduced in the update just a day before this round as well. But let's finally have a look at the lap. Actually, that's shortly. This is the qualifying session, in fact. It was a nice long session of 10 minutes, so we got like 4 or 5 chances to have a go at qualifying. Tyre wear, of course, is now on for qualifying, so we decided to do 2 sessions here. The first of which we got a 45.2, good enough for provisional pole, and then this is going to be my fastest lap of the session. So turn 1 is this hairpin at the top of the hill, and you can see it's actually set in the scenery in California. It's around the Big Sur area in California, State Route 1 in California, on the outskirts of San Francisco. There's a lot of little details around this track that recall the actual scenery around there, but it is overall in the shape of the Grand Valley Speedway, but with completely different scenery, which we'll spot soon. We're going to head into this middle section now, which is actually a bit clunky, to be honest. It's difficult to get right. The Group 3 cars don't love this section. It's just clunky and slow, and the corners don't flow onto one another very well, and that's one thing I will say about this track, is that I don't feel like it flows that well, but I've got myself used to it now, and it's actually a pretty decent track. You can see we loop around to the ocean, the seaside now. We are kind of up on cliffs, and then this bridge was fairly significant on the old track, and it's been pared back quite a bit. It's not a particularly long straight towards the end of the lap there. You can see we're purple on our lap. And then heading into this last section, this awkward corner in a tunnel, hard to spot the apex. And then you've got this, honestly, it's like a junction, but it's set up to be a chicane for this racetrack here, and that leads us out back onto the main straight. A few curves left on this narrow bridge, but that narrow bridge, by the way, is reminiscent of the Bixby Bridge in California as well on State Route 1. And then that leads us out onto the main straight, where we're going to complete the lap. And it's going to be a pretty good time, but not quite a 44. Oh, so close to a 44. Oh. Alright, relax. But it was a pretty intense qualifying session, but it was good enough for provisional pole. I think what's important to look at now is what this track used to look like. So this is footage from Gran Turismo 6 that I found on Stephen McKay's YouTube channel. He'll be linked down in the description just for the sake of crediting the footage. But we're going to have a look. So this is the main straight now. You can see completely different scenery. Now, I don't know whether I'm lucky or unlucky here, but I don't have a nostalgic connection to this track. I never played the old Gran Turismo games. Gran Turismo Sport was my first game, my first Gran Turismo game that I played. So I don't really have an emotional connection with this track, so I don't really mind the changes, but you can see just how different it is. So what was that downhill fast flowing section with the hairpin at the bottom of the hill is now this section, not quite as intense as it is on the new track, and then this hairpin is not as tight as it is in Gran Turismo 7, and then this is where we head up into the clunky middle section, and the elevation changes are completely different. So we kind of go, in Gran Turismo 7 there's a compression here, and then you go back uphill for this left-hander, and this right-hander, but you can see it's actually downhill, and there's a bit of a dip here, and there's a lake on the left there as well, which just in Gran Turismo 7 it just drops off a cliff into the ocean. and then this tunnel is longer than it is in Gran Turismo 7, and then this corner in GT7 drops away as you curve around, so it's really difficult to keep the car on the inside. This tunnel doesn't exist in Gran Turismo 7, and then this is the bridge that I said was significant. You can see it's got a lovely blue archway, which is gone for Gran Turismo 7. Honestly, I don't understand that. They definitely just could have kept the blue archway in if they really wanted to, but I think once again they've modelled the bridge in GT7 off a real-life bridge on State Route 1 in California. And then this is now the junction section in Gran Turismo 7, but you can see it's just a normal flowing chicane. No junctions to report of, so completely different scenery, completely different change. It's now a road-based circuit, essentially a street circuit on State Route 1 in California that happens to be in the shape of Grand Valley. So people that love this old track aren't actually particularly happy about it, but I think the change in scenery is nice. But there you go, completely different change. So I'd like to hear, I'm interested, what do you think of the changes? Obviously, it's a completely different track, it's not the same track, but I've come up with a narrative in my head that makes it make sense. So here's my story of why the track is so different in the in-universe sense. Grand Valley Highway 1 is the original version of the circuit, but we so happen to be racing on the new version of the circuit in the older game, so you can see it swapped around. So this is the original circuit, but it was too dangerous to continue racing, so a very rich fan of the track that used to race here decided to go and build a replica of the circuit as a purpose-built facility, and that is Grand Valley Speedway. But Grand Valley Highway 1 is the original. See, I've made it make sense. But honestly, what they've done is they've not actually catered to the people that love this circuit, and I think the whole point about adding an old nostalgic circuit into the new Gran Turismo game is to satisfy the fans of the older track, and that's not what they've done here. They've completely changed it. They could have got away with it, to be fair. They could have had this exact circuit as is, but they could have just not called it Grand Valley. They could have had maybe a Grand Valley reference in the name. Maybe they could have called it Highway GV1 or something, or State Route GV1 or something. You know what I'm going for. Have the GV initials in there, but then not call it Grand Valley. But then I think what they'd also have to do at that point is also put in a genuine adaptation of Grand Valley Speedway, because then the fans of Grand Valley Speedway, if they get stuck with a State Route GV1 and it's this track, they're going to be like, well, this is crap. But my personal opinion is I don't think it's actually a bad track. I quite enjoy it. The scenery is very unique. There's no other track in the game that's like this, and you may look at it and go, well, it's desert. You know, we've got Willow Springs, but it's like, yeah, Willow Springs, there's no ocean, there's no water, there's no cliffs. It's a very beautiful scenery around here, to be completely honest, and I like it for that fact. So I think it's quite nice. I'm enjoying the track. I find it a little bit clunky, it doesn't flow that well, but I think on the whole it's actually a decent track, and it's not like anything else we have in the game, which I think is the main positive point for it. In terms of this race though, we started off pole position. Tez started behind us and has dropped down the field, but I think that's down to his chosen tyre in accordance with the strategy, which we'll talk about in a second. That just released King of, it's DQN, but we'll just call him Don, I think, into second place. We got ourselves a penalty for exceeding the track limits, and that's another thing which I'm not a massive fan of at this track. And I think, actually, I'm the minority in that, because everyone that I've kind of expressed my penalty-related gripes to have kind of said, well, it is just the white line, so I think that's what we all want at the end of the day across all tracks, and honestly I probably agree with that, but it's just stupid because you feel like you've got your whole car on the tarmac and you can somehow get a penalty. But the penalty that we served on the bridge. That just brought Don into the picture. So he's now less than a second behind, and he remained about a second behind for the majority of this first stint, but we get a pretty bad exit out of turn number 1 there, just grazing the barrier on the exit. Actually, here's a question. Is that turn 1, or is the slight left-hand curve up towards the braking zone for that right-hander, is that turn 1? I don't know, who knows. But in terms of strategy, because we're going to be thinking about heading into the pits shortly, as you can see, our soft tyres are reaching the end of their life, as Don is now right under my rear wing, putting the pressure on. Soft and medium tyres available, so obviously qualifying on the softs, and then the softs and the medium are also both required in the race. You have to do a stint on each of the tyre compound in order to avoid a 1-minute penalty. So that's what we're going to have to do. Starting off pole position, naturally, I decided to start on the softer tyre, and I mentioned before that Tez, who started behind me, ended up dropping down the field, and I think that's because Tez decided to start on the mediums, so that's exactly why I didn't want to start on the mediums either. And then Don, I believe, is also on the softs, given he's able to stick with me for the majority of this first stint, and he's going to be pretty close heading into this little bit of a braking zone. But because of the elevation change, which is completely different compared to the old version of this track, it's now kind of uphill and off camber. It's quite difficult to get a move done there, because as long as the car sticks to the inside, you're not hanging it around the outside. But I guess if the car does leave the gap on the inside, they're going to wash wide and allow you to get past. So maybe it's not too bad of an overtaking opportunity. But something else we have to consider is my car choice as well, which, if you haven't worked out by now, I've decided to select Aston Martin, and I'm choosing the DBR9 for this one, which is a bit better in a straight line compared to the V12 Vantage, and this is exactly why I chose this car, because that Porsche 911 is much better in the corners, but it's not so good on the straight, which means it doesn't have a good chance into the overtaking opportunities on this circuit, which is turn 1 is the best one, and then you can probably get something done at this hairpin at the bottom of the hill, but these corners are so grip limited that it's hard to run side by side through here, and you can so easily get a penalty on that left-hander we just went through. But you can see that Porsche gains ground under braking, I nearly said. But we are going to have to come into the pits on the end of lap 9 here. We're going to do the remainder of the race on the mediums, but we just got to try and hold position. He's got the pressure on, and it's so easy to make a mistake through this middle section as well, because the corners are so slow, it's so clunky, you're already not feeling that comfortable through here. Really, really slow apex. Slowest corner on the circuit is that left-hander of turn number 10, I think it technically is. And then as we round out towards this bridge once again, he's right behind. I've got to try and keep this Aston Martin on the inside of the corners in order to defend this position, and as long as I get a good exit, which is really hard through the left-handers because my left-hand front tyre, the working tyre in that situation, has not got a whole great deal of life left. And then this corner, it's got to suffer too. As you can see, that Porsche closes right down, try and cover off this corner here, and then as we exit out the final real corner, we do get a good exit out of there as well, and let's unleash the power of the Aston Martin. Whack on the right indicator just to let him know I will be going over to the right hand side to enter the pit lane, because there's absolutely no way I can get away with another lap on this set of tyres. I'm going to lose tyre life there. So into the pits we go. We quickly select those medium tyres. Fuel is no issue for this particular round here, as the Aston Martin boys get to work on my DBR9. So I did mention before that I also had the choice of the V12 Vantage, but the Vantage is not as good in a straight line. It's much better in the corners though, so it probably would be comparable, but I often find that in racing situations, you're better off having a straight line car, because it's easier to defend with a car that's good in a straight line than it is with a car that's good in the corners. But the Porsche behind's got a penalty, so that's going to be interesting when that works itself out. Just the one penalty zone on this track, which I think is the case of all circuits in Gran Turismo 7. In GT Sport, some tracks had 2 or 3 penalty zones, but in the new game, just one penalty serving zone, and that is on the back straight along the bridge, which should have the blue archway if we're being pedantic about that. But heading through this middle section now on the medium tyre, so you can see there we run quite wide, or kind of run hot past that apex. Don't quite get the car stopped, but we managed to just defend this position. He's about a tenth and a half behind, which is essentially one car length. So we do have to try and make sure we're meeting these apexes and not running too wide. It's so easy to do in this car too because it's not got a great deal of downforce, which is why it's good in a straight line, but it's just crap in the corners. So I do worry, in fact, that if I were behind that Porsche, they would drive away into the distance. But the Porsche serves that penalty, just releases the pressure from behind, and we are going to be able to settle into a decent rhythm through this stint now and just try and lap as cleanly and as consistently as possible. As we did in the first stint, you can see my stack of lap times there, 46s for the majority of that first stint. Same deal for this second stint here, a little bit more consistent too, 46.7 and followed by a 0.6, 2.5s and a 0.8 as the tyre wear starts to come into effect. But as we're reaching the latter stages of this stint, the differences between the DBR9 and the 911 RSR, which we're both in here for P1 and P2 respectively, they start to become apparent. So this DBR9, really good in a straight line, and while the tyre is there, while the tyre life is underneath, the car's actually pretty fast, which is good. In GT Sport, this car wasn't very competitive at all unless tuning was turned on, because it was the most responsive car to a tune back then. But as for this game, the new game, much more balanced. This car can compete a lot better, and it's a very good car, in fact, on the soft tyres in race conditions at the start of the stint, very fast. But then as the tyre wear starts to come into effect, it starts to struggle in the corners, and that's because the car inherently on its own struggles a bit in the corners anyway, but you can drive around it with good tyres underneath you, but as they drop off, you just begin to struggle. That Porsche 911 as well, the other thing is that it's a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, which means that it turns a bit better, it's got better turn-in, the front tyres aren't doing as much work because they haven't got the engine sitting over the top of them, so it's able to just have that bit more tyre life on the front tyres, which is why it's a little bit better in the corners, and the mid-engine nature means that it can rotate a bit better and get the power down on the exit a lot better as well. So we're just got to focus on holding this position, because I think this track position is all that's really allowing me to stay in the lead here, and it's good because I can just kind of defend through the corners. I lose a little bit of time on these in this twisty middle section, and then on the straights I can extend that gap a little bit, so that's why I'm able to keep this position. But say I was out of the range of a move of the Porsche on the straight, I think I'd be over and out. There would be no way I'd be able to keep up with the Porsche through this middle section here. Tez has got back up into third as we're rounding out towards the end of this particular race here today. But as we head down the bridge for the last time, that Porsche is not going to be close enough to go for a move, so let's make sure we keep it to the inside, avoid a penalty through the final chicane. It's so easy to get one through here too, but just graze those curbs. They're not really curbs in the sense of a racetrack, they're curbs in the sense of like an actual road traffic situation. We get a bit of a bad exit out of there, just running two wheels on the gravel, and I was actually a bit worried I was going to get a penalty, but I think we just about avoid it, and thanks to the straight line prowess of my car, the Porsche is not able to capitalise, although they do catch up to about 2 tenths behind, but we are able to win that race. Oh wow, how's that for pressure? How's that for pressure? Goodness me. So obviously pretty satisfied with the win there. It's going to be 237 points, which is a bit light, but I was considering just taking it, to be honest, because it was a decent drive, a nice clean drive, and I was able to not fall victim to the pressure that Porsche was putting on behind. But I found out something interesting later. I was watching Hainsey on his stream over on Twitch, and he was using an alt account with less driver rating than me. And for those that aren't aware, the way the game works out the split is by ranking every driver that enters the slot by driver rating, and the top, so say 60 people enter, the top 20 will be split 1, the next 20 will be split 2, the bottom 20 will be split 3, in terms of the rank of all the drivers by DR. I found out later on that in this slot here, which was slot 1, Hainsey was in the split above me with less DR. That doesn't make sense. So I was starting to think, oh man, what's going on there? The fact that Tez was with me in this lobby, that led me to believe that there'd been a little bit of a glitch or a bug in the background, but then Tez brought up that it was probably your sportsmanship rating, so even though I am S rated there's a number behind it and being a little bit lower in that S tier could push me into Split 3, which I think this was. So I think even though I put in a high quality drive, a drive that was worthy of more points had I been in a higher split, I only got 237 for that one, and that meant that I ended up going again. And that's going to be in the next video, because I wanted this one here to just be a bit of a showcase, my first main race on Grand Valley Highway 1. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's a bad circuit, but I'm interested to hear everyone else's opinions down in the comments as well. I don't have the nostalgic connection, as I mentioned before, to the old Grand Valley Speedway, so I'm not perturbed by the fact that this track is so different to what it used to be. And in fact, I think I actually prefer this scenery, because looking at that lap from Gran Turismo 6, the scenery of that track looked very similar to Deep Forest, and it was a similar, a similar style of circuit, you know, some fast sections with a handling section in the middle, that's Deep Forest. And then I guess Grand Valley's a little bit the same, but a different feel of circuit, I guess, but the same scenery. And I think maybe that's the motivation for them wanting to change it a little bit for GT7. And like I said, I've got the narrative that makes it make sense to me, and I'm satisfied with that. The other thing about it as well is that Grand Valley Highway 1 is perfect for jumping in your car of choice and just cruising around, especially with the addition of PSVR 2, which means you can essentially sit inside your dream car and then drive around the Californian scenery in State Route 1, which I think is a pretty good addition. But they're my thoughts. Put yours down below in the comments, and while you're down there, hit the like button as well, and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos and streams from me. But that's going to be the end of this one today, and that means that is it from me. So once again, I do thank you very much for watching. See you later.